Welcome to the multi-location meeting of Community Finance and Strategic Leadership Committee on the Scrutiny Committee, on the 17th of October 2024. I am Councillor Phil Rogers and I'll be chairing the meeting. Please could you ensure your phones are switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. In addition, when asked to raise your hand, if members who are virtually viewing this meeting could raise your electronic hand, and for members who are in the chamber, just raise your hand. On to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please?
I can't see any indications, Chair.
Thank you, Alison. We'll move now to part 1 of the meeting and on to agenda item 3. This is to consider items selected from the Cabinet Forward Work Programme, and we'll now move to consider the reports as selected by this committee for consideration. Agenda item 3A, which is the big one today, the budget for 2025 to 2026. At this point, I'd like to bring in Councillor Simon Noyle, Cabinet Member for Finance, Performance and Social Justice, please.
That's easy for you to say, Chair. Right, thank you very much. Just wanted to set the scene a little bit in terms of this being the first session, scrutiny session we've had to look at the things that Hugh has presented to us in terms of where we are with the budget and savings and income generation ideas. So there are over 90 line items, which I've asked the chairs and vice chairs to incorporate into their committee meetings so that they go through each of those line items. Some of the items will be quicker than others to go through. Some will be requiring more information. Some will be more contentious than others as well. So I think it's really important to understand that we're at £11.8 million worth of those savings and income generation ideas at the moment. And if we do make any changes to those proposals, that's going to have an impact on the 11.8 million. The gap as it currently is 8.1 million, of course, and that will go up if the 11.8 million pound reduces. So it's worth just considering and bearing that in mind as we go through each of the scrutiny sessions before us. Specifically with this directorate, because 3 of the heads of service fall under my portfolio as well. We had a catch up earlier in the week, and I think if you look at the impact of several of the line items and what that means to the service delivery within each of those heads of services teams, I think this one perhaps plays more of a role that members wouldn't necessarily see, but that might have an impact on other directorates. So it's worth considering where we are with this directorate. A lot of the people that work on things behind the scene have an impact in other directorates, is what I'm trying to say. I think maybe those who are with us today will expand on that a bit more when we come to it. So I'll hand you over to Hugh and Noyle now then, who will explain a bit more and go through the process for us. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Noyle. Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of today really is to have some early engagement with scrutiny members in relation to the savings proposals being developed by the Strategy and Corporate Services Directorate and the Finance Division. This meeting is not part of the formal consultation process of the budget. It's simply a chance for officers to talk scrutiny members through some of their initial thoughts. As members of the committee will be aware, the vast majority of our budgets are spent on staff. So as you'd expect, in order to deliver savings, it will mean reductions in staff. What we're trying to do is to make sure that any staff who want to remain in our organisation can do so. So we are looking at opportunities for allowing people to leave on a voluntary basis or perhaps reduce hours through schemes such as flexible retirement. Those conversations with staff are currently ongoing. So we are discussing with our various teams around who could possibly want to leave the organisation, which is why at the moment you'll see some of the proposals don't have a significant amount of detail because, as I say, those conversations are ongoing and it would be wholly inappropriate to start naming posts or teams in these proposals in a public domain until those conversations have been concluded. But when we get to the formal consultation on the budget, there will be more detail on these proposals because that work will have been done. So just wanted to put it in a bit of context, Chair, and I'll hand over to Noyle to introduce his directorate now. So thank you, diolch.
Diolch Hugh a pnawn da cynghorwyr. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'd firstly like to thank my 3 heads of service and their management teams for the incredible amount of hard work that they've undertaken to date to bring forward these proposals at an early stage. The Strategy and Corporate Services Directorate delivers services that are critical in supporting all directorates to deliver the corporate plan priorities that will improve the lives of the residents of Neath Talbot Council. People and organisational development, legal services and digital services are all key enabling services, and it's essential that these services are as efficient and as streamlined as possible. As a directorate, our proposals include a mix of transformational change in the way we deliver our services, reductions in service availability and quality, improvements to service efficiency, increases in fees and charges, and we are also exploring all potential uses of the latest digital technology to ensure we deliver our services across the directorate as efficiently and as effectively as possible. We're looking to see how we can streamline our processes and ensure we add value at all times to all services and in other directorates. We are the directorate with the smallest overall budget, of which over 90% is related to salary costs. The 5% target for our directorate equates to just over £731,000. And that is on top of all the previous year's reductions in budget that have taken place as well. We have 351 full-time equivalent members of staff, of which 45 are currently funded from either reserves, grants, or departmental recharges. Across the directorate, we are currently looking at a reduction of 21 posts. You will, I'm sure, appreciate that we have intentionally at this stage, as Hugh has alluded to, not included the details of which posts are impacted, as we are mindful that we have to follow due diligence regarding our HR processes, and conversations with teams and staff are continuing. There are specific conversations taking place currently on voluntary redundancy options, reduced hours, flexible retirement, as we work very, very hard to try to ensure no compulsory redundancies, although at this stage that cannot be ruled out. As an aside, I also chair the Redeployment Action Group, and our aim is to ensure where there are possible compulsory redundancies across the authority, that if a member of staff wishes to remain working for Neath Talbot Council, then we will endeavour to find suitable employment for them. That will also include potential wraparound learning and development to ensure that they can deliver within that post as well. This afternoon, therefore, members, we welcome your scrutiny of our proposals that we have put forward for this early engagement, and we are very keen to hear of any proposals that you may have that could assist us in this process. What I'll do now is pass over to Chris Owen and each of the heads of service respectively. They will give a brief overview of maybe some of the processes they've gone through and a bit of context around their proposals. We then take it line by line introduction, and you can ask questions at the end of each line. Felly, I'm going to hand now over to Chris Owen. Diolch.
Thank you, Noel Wyn. So, as everyone will be aware, my remit is around digital services, and I'm the head of service for the Digital Services Division, which not only includes the digital teams, but also the CCTV operation across the authority. To give some context, my divisional budget for this financial year is just over £5.8 million. So when I'm looking for the 5% target required for next financial year, that's in the region of £294,000. It's important, I feel, to understand what we've also done in previous years to meet some of the savings targets that we've been tasked with achieving. And to put that into context, in the financial year 23-24, digital services achieved savings of around £429,000, which was through a mix of vacancy targets where we had vacant posts that we were able to freeze. We also did a lot of work around the contracts that we had in place around things like software for the organisation, removing in the region of £150,000 worth of costs in that space. We did some work around hybrid working, and there was a further £20,000 reduced there. In this financial year, we've done some further work on our telephony contracts and our photocopier contracts, and we've removed in the region of £20,000 there. We've also done a lot of work on our service level agreements to look at where we can maximise income opportunities through external funding sources, and we've brought in an additional £11,000 in that space. Plus, there's been some further work around some of the vacancies that we've had, which has brought in around £119,000. So that's £150,000 in this financial year. Next financial year, as I said, what we're looking at is a savings target of £294,000. So when you add all those together over the last two financial years and the next financial year, that's a net saving that we've made of £873,000 within the division, which equates to 15% of the budget. Now, it's also important to understand that on top of those savings targets that we've realised and we've delivered, that some of the costs that we incur within digital services, similar to some of the other directorates around things like energy cost increases and so on, are unavoidable costs to us. So some of our software contracts can go up by, on average, around 10% year on year. And that's an increase that we have not in previous years had funding for. So that's a pressure that I've had to carry on top of the other savings that we've been tasked with achieving. As I'm sure you'll recognise, digital services is a department like the other corporate services that is delivering across the council. So everything that gets delivered from bin collections through to other waste services, social services and education depend on digital services to underpin them. On top of that, in the current climate where all service areas are looking to transform the way they work, that also brings increased pressure through onto digital services. So we have to be really careful around any proposed cuts and savings that we're making to the service to make sure that we're not preventing our ability to support the other service areas in their opportunities to transform and make savings. So whenever we look at changes to the structure, the posts that are vacant, we're constantly doing a risk appraisal on them to actually scrutinise what the impact of any jobs going would be. So within the papers you'll have been provided today, you'll see against digital services, there's 3 lines that have been set out. One is around mobile phone contract changes, which is £20,000, which is effectively targeting a change in the contract, which is allowing us to make some further savings. But realistically, that is the last amount of savings we're going to make off the mobile phone contracts as things stand. So there's no more scope in that space. We've also looked at how we can support other directorates like Environment change some of their operating models. So we've successfully worked with Tregellis Court and the Environment Directorate to look at the security arrangements for that facility, taking an expensive security guard out of the operation, replacing it with artificial intelligence and a barrier control system that's operated from the CCTV control room on a 24/7 basis. So it's allowed them to make a significant saving, but brought some extra money into the CCTV operation. We intend to do the same for the keys starting in the next financial year, where again, we'll be able to take the security out of the keys, make that saving in the Environment Directorate, but bring a little bit of that money back into CCTV to help sustain that service going forward. The top line, though, as you'll have seen, is the service remodelling across digital services. And what that specifically relates to is looking at the staffing structure for the division. What I've done to date is written out to all staff within digital services, asking them to express an interest in whether they would be interested in considering early retirement, voluntary redundancy, or reduced working hours, or indeed flexible retirement. The intention is once we've had all of the expressions of interest in, we will review them, as I said, looking at it from a risk-based approach to see if any of those posts could potentially be released and then removed from the structure to move us towards that target of £264,000. What I would say is that we have already realised a significant part of that through through one existing vacancy and 2 voluntary redundancies that we've already accepted. So we are well on the way to that £264,000, which in effect will equate to 2 posts. So as I say, I can't share further details at the moment until we've gone through that analysis. We'll be presenting that back in terms of what the posts are and the impact of potentially cutting those posts going forward, but it will be done on that sort of balance of risk and service delivery.
Many thanks, Chris. Very thorough, fair play. We'll move now for Chris for the 3 lines within the strategy and corporate services. A, B and C, they marked this year. Okay, marked by letters. Do we have any questions of Chris on the first 3 items on the line, please? We'll go to Councillor Tim Bowen first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. What I'd like to ask Chris is basically how big is your team at the moment? And what's the minimum amount of staff you need to function if people do go?
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. The team is around 90 posts at the moment within digital services. And it's a difficult one to say what the minimum size of the team could be because it depends on which function within the structure we'd be looking at. So some areas that look at cybersecurity, for example, there's a team of 4 people in that space. We would recommend that we couldn't reduce that number because of the potential risks it would create to the organisation by not having that resource in place there. Service desk is another example. There's around 12 service desk analysts in place at the moment. Now, again, we would look at the demand coming through to the service desk. We'd look at how quickly we respond to incidents at the moment. We would then understand what the impact might be if somebody from the service desk came forward to say they wanted to go and what impact that would have on the service delivery. We then discuss that with other service areas to say, can we accept that? Are you happy with that? Yes, no. And then we'd put that forward as a potential option. So it really depends where those expressions of interest come from within the structure itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councillor Sonia Reynolds, please.
Just, a couple of questions from me, because you've explained about the that wonderful phrase, service remodeling. So you look at it, you think, oh yeah, what's going on there? What's behind that? But in terms of the change from security personnel to barrier access and CCTV, is clear consideration being given to safety of staff working on those sites when they're lone working later in the evenings, etc., because that's a real worry in those terms. And the other area would be any concerns and real consideration should you decide to, should anybody from the service desk decide to go, of the increasing caseload on those of us who are frontline out there, caused by the fact that things don't happen very quickly when you put things in through digital services anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of things like the security access, we've not actually changed the model of loan working for those staff who would be attending those sites. This is purely around how you gain access to the area. So security at the moment or previously wouldn't have acted as a loan working point for the staff who were going on site. All we've done is taken them out of the mix, and we've got barrier control now. So when members of staff go up to the barrier, we can buzz them in rather than having to have an expensive security guard sitting there buzzing them in effectively. So the operational arrangements remain the same around loan working in those areas. In terms of the caseloads, that's one of the considerations what we'd be looking at. So we have service level agreements around the incidents that get logged on the service desk. So we would be undertaking an analysis of if we had one less service desk analyst or one less person in another area, what would the impact on those wait times be for the end users? But similarly, how much extra pressure are we putting on the existing staff in those teams to deal with an increased workload? Does that mean that they're going to become more stressed? We're going to incur more sickness because there's more pressure going through to the team. So it's a really, it's very much a balancing act to try and make sure that we're considering all these factors and then putting the best case forward as where we're going to have the least impact. That there will be impact, undoubtedly, but what's the least impact for the organisation?
Many thanks, Chris. Can I bring Noelwyn in at this point, please?
Just very quickly picking up on the barrier access provision that Chris and his team will be delivering and income generating by £10,000. By doing that, it'll allow the Environment Department to save nearly £100,000. Okay, in terms of their security guard, it will no longer be there. So there's some capital investment there. However, that's the benefit of having digital services in terms of, we can make some income off the back of that. However, the biggest picture here is that it allows the Environment Department to realise a potential saving of nearly £100,000 in their area as well.
Thank you, Noelwyn. Councillor Reynolds, would you like to come back in?
Just my concern of, it may work effectively. It's just if you're working on your own, knowing another person is around is much more secure than knowing someone's watching you on a camera.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Next up, we have Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Diolch, David. Thank you. Again, a couple of things from me, and I'm glad Chris and Noelwyn and Simon actually acknowledged at the start the sort of cross-cutting nature of the services that we're looking at here. And when I was going through the list, that's the way I was kind of looking through this. Okay, what are the sort of consequential impacts that we could get from some of these changes? Just on the service remodeling for digital services, firstly. You mentioned, Chris, that some of those savings have already been realised in vacant posts, etc. can you let us know how much of the 264,000 has been realised and what sort of left to find within that service remodel? I think that would be quite helpful. And in terms of, this worry that I've got and has been discussed today, capacity to manage digital transformation across the organisation. Now, I'm assuming, we're worried about that, but we're also worried about cybersecurity, as you mentioned, service desk ability to keep the rest of the organisation going in terms of, their digital infrastructure. So, we're balancing a lot of priorities. And have you got a sense of, what those critical priorities are within the service area?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Percy. So the savings we've effectively got in the bag, for want of a better phrase, are £156,906, and that equates to 3 senior infrastructure operations engineers, as I said, 1 vacancy and 2 who we've already accepted on voluntary redundancy. That leaves us with an amount to find of around about £107,000. So again, depending on which posts come forward, which posts we can agree, will depend how many we need to take out. But as a very rough rule of thumb, you're looking potentially 2, maybe 3 posts in that space. I'm completely with you, as I obviously would be, in terms of understanding the impact on any cuts to digital services and the impact that will have on the organisation's ability to transform. As you know, we have a very ambitious digital strategy that we published last year, which has got a number of key transformation programs aligned to it. Everything that we're doing now in terms of reviewing the impact of any further cuts on things like staffing will be against the priorities that we've set within that digital strategy. And then we will be presenting those back as part of the risk profiles and the risk analysis. For me, clearly there are some clear red lines around some of the cuts that we would make. As you mentioned, cybersecurity is the obvious one. We cannot afford to expose the organisation to cyber threat, because effectively that will be shutting the organisation down, and the impact of that would be significant. So it's a case, as I say, of just working it through on a case-by-case basis, looking at the big picture, looking at how we can support the other directorates in terms of their transformation programs, and making sure that nothing that we do in digital services inadvertently has an impact on their plans, because we don't want to have a domino effect either, and we want to manage those interdependencies properly.
Many thanks, Chris. Councillor Percy, would you like to respond?
Yeah, briefly, if I may, Chair. No, thanks for that, Chris, and I appreciate the clarity as well on the savings still left to find within that sort of remodelling figure. It's perhaps maybe a slight relief that a significant amount of that has been sort of found already. Just in terms of, you've mentioned when you were going through, particularly talking about the barrier access and some of the areas where perhaps digital services is looking to, for its own service area, maybe get some income from another directorate while saving them a significant amount of money. I'm assuming you're going to sort of pursue that avenue going forward, maybe with some of this transformational work, in order to make sure you can sustain the team, because I think that's obviously, there's going to be some very ambitious things coming forward in that transformational work, but it's you're going to have to make sure you've got that capacity, and obviously finding it just out of the base budget is not looking likely, is it, in this scenario? So is that something you're looking to do, really, is to make sure those costs on digital services are reflected accurately by other service areas, paying a fair share for that service?
Thank you, Councillor Percy. Bring Chris back in, please.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely. I think I'm also mindful, though, that what we don't want to be doing is just sort of moving money around the organisation and potentially creating pressures in other directorates where we needn't. So I think we've just got to be mindful of that and make sure it's done in a sort of fair and transparent way. But certainly, for example, where in the barrier control example that we've got, where there's a significant saving in environment overall, we'd expect to see some of that into CCTV in that example to make sure we can sustain the service. What you'll notice that I haven't put any service remodelling proposals forward for CCTV, because if we take any members of staff out of that service, we can't run the 24/7, 365 operation. So that immediately shuts down. So for me, that is not even an option that we consider whilst we are delivering CCTV services. But what we want to do is grow the service to make it more sustainable.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Chris. I think that covers it all, Councillor Percy. Yes. Lovely. Thank you. Are there any more questions of Chris at this point, please? Does look like a thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris, for your very well organised responses to the questions and things. Thank you very much. We're moving along next now to the next bit more of a one. Oh, sorry, Councillor Noyle, please.
Sorry, can I just, for clarity, because I think it's really important if we're going to do this, and we're going to do it in every committee, that we have some form of agreement. Chris's service area there, for example, has got those 3 line items. Are we content as members of this committee that they are happy that those 3 items go forward as green line items? Clearly, B and C, I think, are okay. A might need some form of words to say we might need some more information or something, but it would essentially be green. Because I think if we do that now at each of the committees, I think as you go through it, when we get to the end of them, we'll be able to see where we are with everything. Just for you to check.
No problems, Councillor Noyle. You did actually ask to go through one at a time. I was just working them in areas. We'll start off then with SNCSA, digital services, service remodelling across the digital service. Can we see which way should we do this? Is there anybody against that initially? Oh, sorry, Craig.
Yeah, if I can just come in here, I think it's important to make a point clear to members. You're not accepting this from a legal-based perspective at that point as the agreed budget ultimately going forward. That decision doesn't actually happen until next year. What you are indicating at this stage, you're happy for it to be included in the next stage of the process, which is included in the consultation element at this point. And the next time it ultimately comes back to scrutiny committee, it's not something you need to suggest you were taken off the table straight away. It's a no-go. You're just giving an indication that it just moves forward into the next element of the process, not that you are agreeing to it happening today. I just wanted to make that clear to members.
Councillor Reynolds?
I wanted to get that sort of level of clarification, but I'm also concerned to be absolutely clear that any agreement given with absolutely minimal information here is, to it going forward, does not mean that, when it actually comes forward, it will be, fully approved. Because the devil is in the detail. And I have further questions that I'll be taking up outside the meeting because I'll want to stop and think about things a bit more with the more information I've had.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Bring Craig back in at this.
Yeah, I think then the way forward is what we say is there is no objections to this element moving forward at this current time. So it's allowing further forethought, it's allowing further clarity to be gained, and you're not just saying categorically this is a no straight away. You're just happy that it moves now as part of the process at this stage.
Thank you, Craig. I think that makes it a bit straightforward for us now. Councillor Percy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Craig, for your contribution as well. But I'm a little uncomfortable with this, just in the sense of the recommendations that were included within the papers were for us to scrutinise the proposals and maybe put forward alternatives. I certainly wasn't expecting to come here and maybe give a view on these proposals individually, even at an indicative stage today. I'm just a bit cautious, given we're hearing some of the detail, but not all of the detail for the first time. Of doing that, if I'm honest. We're asking some questions. We're all going to go in, reflect on some of the responses we've had. There's going to be more information coming forward, and ultimately it's the Cabinet's decision as to whether they take forward a proposal. I just feel a little uncomfortable having this bounced upon me as how it feels as a scrutiny member. I wasn't expecting to come here today and give a view or an objection on any specific proposal included in this report. So that's how I feel at the moment, Chair.
Lovely. Thanks, Councillor Percy. We'll bring Craig back in again for.
Okay, that's absolutely noted, Councillor Percy. What I would suggest then, members, is what we do is we go through each individual element line by line as we've been doing and give you the opportunity to ask the questions. If you see elements which you think, oh my God, there is a major concern about that, we as a scrutiny committee collectively feel that should be not something we should even be considering at that point. That point can ultimately be made known at this stage. But for now, the view that will be taken is the scrutiny will happen on this document and it moves forward to the next stage and members can contribute even more then at that point. So there's no yay or nay ultimately being given ultimately in this meeting. It would be a scrutiny, but if members have got major objections in respect to proposals, it might be an opportunity just to give some thought to that now so that can be taken on board then as part of future considerations.
Okay, knowing that, then we'll move to point A. This is service remodeling across digital services. Has anybody got a major objection to that going forward for consideration? Or anybody want to bring anything up on that we haven't already this afternoon? Leader, please.
Yeah, can I just add as well then on the points that Craig have raised, and I think it's best to do it at an early stage, taking Craig's advice. If there are, at this stage, recognising red lines, as you call them, or uncomfortable, I'm not suggesting today, of course, but going through the process, try to remember they need the savings to be replaced by something else. I think all scrutiny members need to bear that in mind when they look at line by line of the scrutiny process. That's all. It's not for today, but bear that in mind when you decide that you're not comfortable with something on these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I think we're a bit clearer on it now. If we have a look at A, the service remodeling across digital services, is there anybody who has a major objection to that going forward for consideration? Yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm doing ABC. All right.
Talk about the agenda.
Just for me then, if not today, at some point we need to change the recommendation in the report. If it's at the next meeting of Community Finance and Strategic Leadership, to know what's coming forward that is recommended or not recommended to go forward to Cabinet, because we will need to know that at some point, won't we? Yes.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. That will be at the later stage of the process, ultimately, when we get into the official mode and when the consultation. The issue more for today, as Hugh mentioned and I went earlier on, is to give you an early oversight to the types of issues which are being considered a part of those processes, to give members the overall picture as to where we are. So what I would suggest, Chair, is rather than just go through each individual aspect line by line, do members yay, nay, or have any objections, what we do is we allow you to look at each of the elements that come through it, hear from individual officers, hear the various different proposals, and then you can scrutinise and question to the extent that you wish to. And then at the end of it then, if there are any specific points members want to consider any alternatives for consideration or any other suggestions, that comes forward as part of the overarching roundup of where we've got to.
Thanks, Craig. Thank you, Simon. Yeah, I think we're back to where I originally was going. I think we'll have a look at, are there any things that are in Chris's area? A, B, and C are the lines on the savings, income and generation proposals. Are there anybody who has got major objection to any of those three going forward at this stage? I'm looking up and I've got Councillor Alan Llewellyn, please.
Well, thank you for bringing me in, Chair. Sorry, I wasn't going to comment on the question you've just posed as such, but it's just a general comment that, naturally enough, scrutiny members have said that they only have a certain amount of information at this stage. We realise that. As Cabinet members, we only have a certain amount of information at this stage as well, and scenarios can change. But what I would encourage is that either in meetings or outside of meetings, if members feel that they need more information about a particular item, to ask, either Noelwyn and his team or here as the Director of Finance, because what we don't want is to come to a situation towards the end of the budgeting process. We're starting this process very, very early. in order to tease out and get the correct picture to make our decisions. But what we don't want is towards the end of the process for any member to say they haven't had enough information about a particular item. If there's information that you feel that is needed, please ask it. You can title to the information. There might be some information the officers themselves can't provide at this stage because there are numerous connotations. But you will be provided with as much information as is possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Llewellyn. Nolwenn, if you'd like to come back in, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just would want to reiterate really the points I made at the start, and certainly the points that Hugh made at the start as well. We are in a position here of where there are significant sensitive conversations taking place with staff, and therefore you have to respect the fact that we are working through that detail, and when that detail is confirmed, we will absolutely share that with elected members through the process. And when the papers come back to you through the formal budget consultation process, you will have that detail presented because it will have been finalised by then. But there are several weeks worth of work, if not more, for us to work through the sensitive details, especially when, as Chris has referred to, it entails posts and staff around service remodelling. Diolch, Cadeirydd.
Thank you, Nolwenn. I understand our next meeting is on the 28th of November, so there may be a bit more detail available then. We'll go next to Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Thank you. Just for me, just from clarity as to how we're proceeding here, because I was under the impression we were not going to go through and take some sort of vote on each item, but you are still asking if there's any major objections.
No, what we're looking for, we're not going to take a vote on each one at this point. We're just asking if anybody has any major objections to any of these going forward.
I don't.
Not doing that either, are we?
No, I don't. In my view, I think if a member has something they want to raise on an item, they will raise that objection when they respond to that item. But if we go through it in that way, line by line, there's going to be some sort of implicit support or objection given to each item, and that is what makes me feel uncomfortable.
No problem. No problem, Councillor Percy. I'll bring Craig back in again. My understanding is different as well.
Apologies in that sense, and if I didn't make myself clear in the way in which we were going to be looking at it. What I would suggest then we do as members, we go through each of those proposals, obviously line by line, as we've started already doing from Chris's perspective. Members have got the opportunity to ask questions, to scrutinise, to make any suggestions, any additions, anything that perhaps should ultimately be considered as part of the process as we look at this by a service area. Once we've concluded that service area, we move on to the next one and we just work our way through it. So there is no vote, there's no indication in that sense. What we are asking you to do is scrutinise those proposals, to give your thoughts, your observations, your comments, your suggestions, and then we move on. That is not binding members into any particular format. Obviously, there's still more work to be undertaken, as they just mentioned just now, and we take it from there then at that point. So today is just about scrutiny, you understanding the proposals, knowing ultimately what they are, and then we guide it then from there.
Thank you, Craig. I think this comes back to our new model where we're trying to get as much information early on, and we are early on in this process. I fully understand now we're not going to take things on that. So really it just leaves us now if there are any other questions for Chris, I think, within his area. I can't see any, so we'll move on now. Next up for the next 8 points is Sheena Rees, please. Sheena?
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Following on from Chris's presentation, just to give you a little bit of background to the People and OD service. So the overall budget for the service is 4.6 million per annum. Now that is made up, it includes a certain amount of grant funding and also includes reserve monies funding temporary resources within the team. So primarily the Future of Work team, which is a temporary resource delivering the strategic workforce plan. The service employs 124 people, and those people are spread across human resources, which includes the seconded trade union officers, the Learning, Training and Development team, which is primarily focused on social services and funded by the Social Care Workforce Development Grant, but includes 3 corporate officers who provide training across the rest of the council. We have the corporate occupational health and safety and wellbeing team. We have the emergency planning team. We have the corporate strategy and performance management team, which also includes communications and marketing, customer services, the public services board, mayoral and civic admin, and the executive support. So as you can see, we are quite an eclectic service, and we cover quite a wide range of activities across the council. There are elements of the service which are very much frontline. So customer services, for example, are as frontline as I think you can get. So in terms of coming into this financial year, our budget was reduced by 123,000. That was a combination of reducing non-staffing spend, deleting vacant posts, and some service efficiencies. Going forward into 25-26, we'll be reducing the budget by 225,000. There are absolutely no easy answers to how we reduce our budget. Around 95% of the budget is spent on people. So we deliver our services through people. We've examined the non-staffing spend as far as we can, and there's very little to shake off the non-staffing spend now. We've spent since 2011 reducing everything as far as we can, and there's very little wiggle room. We also don't have many vacant posts across the structure, but where we do have vacant posts, that has been our first action, to propose that we are deleting vacant posts. We've also put in place a temporary vacancy freeze across the service. So I've made it clear to my accountable managers and to the people across the service that if jobs become vacant, we will have a default position of not filling them and potentially deleting them. That's not an easy message to deliver to what I have, which are small teams, very hardworking teams, and every job counts across people and OD. So that hasn't been an easy message for them. The other thing that I have done is meet with my service. So I've had 9 briefings to date, and I have asked them for volunteers for voluntary redundancy, flexible retirement, and temporary reductions in hours. Again, that's not an easy thing to ask members of staff because it does cause alarm. What I have said to everyone is that we are going to do absolutely everything we can to solve the budget problem that we have, and to avoid anybody leaving the organisation who does not want to leave the organisation. A number of staff have come forward for voluntary redundancy, so I'm working my way through that at the moment. I don't find that particularly easy because I have to say every single one of them, I think, I do not want to lose your job, but that's where we are. So in terms of the proposals, I don't know how much I can really say to you about these, because what I've tried to do is divide the problem as evenly as I can across the service. And in terms of service remodelling proposals, that's a case of looking at the volunteers that are coming forward and seeing what kind of impact that will have if we remove their job from the structure. Inevitably, it is going to lead to reductions in our services. We are trying to mitigate against the impact of that because we provide services to the front line. So if you reduce our services, that has an impact somewhere. So whether that impact is increasing risks or whether it is pushing work onto service managers, we're doing everything we can to mitigate against it. We have a long track record across people in OD of being early adopters of transformational change, and in particular digital technology. So supporting some of Chris's points around the fact that we really do need digital services support at the moment. We were the first service in the council to adopt robotics process automate, and we're increasing some of the work of the robot, who's an integral member of our team now. We are also, so through the Future of Work team, we've been able to produce an awful lot of guidance for line managers. So where we are perhaps reducing support for line managers, actually we're going to enable them to be more self-sufficient anyway. So we previously had a chatbot, so we are reintroducing the chatbot to help with that as well. In terms of the proposals that don't relate to service remodelling, so I'll just explain a little bit more about those. So in terms of the emergency planning team and the increase in income, this relates to the council's coma sites, and the council is able to reclaim costs that we spend in terms of supporting the coma sites. We last reviewed the charges 5 years ago, so actually it is quite reasonable that we review the charges that we give to the coma sites and increase the income. It is a modest increase in terms of the overall council's budget position, but that's a reasonable increase for those coma sites. We're deleting vacant hours in the policy and exec support team. We're planning to delete a vacant occupational health nurse in the occupational health team. And I've also proposed to reduce the trade union facilities budget. So this is the budget that supports the secondment of GMB and Unison officers. I have arranged to meet with the regional officers of both GMB and Unison to explain the situation to them and to consult with them in relation to that proposal. So, Chair, I think I'll leave my explanation there, and I'm really happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Many thanks, Gina. Obviously a difficult job and not a very pleasant situation to find yourselves in when you're dealing, majorities dealing with people, isn't it? So we'll now go to members' questions on the points of D to K. It is, right? There's 8 of them altogether. And I have an indication, first off, from Councillor Sarah Thomas, please, Sarah.
Thank you. So my first question, I've got another one, but my first one is, so on the emergency planning team, you've listed a temporary change in team structure. I'm just, can you give a bit more detail on that? I don't quite understand. Obviously, this is going to apply to next year's budget, so all of April to March the year after. And I'm just wondering what it is, if I could put a bit more on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Gina, if you'd like to come back in.
Yeah, sure. So this is where a older member of staff has flexibly retired, so we've reduced their hours of work. We've got a younger colleague who is in training to be able to step into their role in 12 to 18 months. So the temporary nature of the change relates to the fact that we haven't changed the team structure on a substantive basis yet. But when the older member of staff eventually retires, the younger member of staff will be in a really good position to apply for their job, and then we'll be able to delete their job below it. So at the moment, it's a temporary saving in the full knowledge that we'll have to take that money out of the budget the following financial year. And hopefully we will have resolved it by then. If we haven't, we'll look at doing something else. But you know, I'm a big fan if you can find a way of doing something even on a temporary basis, then that gives you a bit more time, and hopefully as the older member of staff retires, the younger member of staff qualifies and moves into their job. Hopefully it's all pretty seamless.
Brilliant.
Lovely, thanks, Sheena. Councillor Thomas, you would like to come back with your second question?
Thank you. So my other question was, so I mean, obviously you've been doing a lot of risk assessment and mitigations for these risk factors. I mean, is that something that we would be able to see as a committee? Because I think for us to really scrutinise this, we need to understand what those risks are. And I appreciate it's probably quite a lot for you to do verbally now, but I mean, is that something that's going to come back?
I think so. As we go through the budget decision-making process, the proposals from my service are going to become clearer as I sign up volunteers for redundancy, I hope, which then enable us to achieve our savings target. The worst case scenario for me, and I think one of my biggest risks at the moment, is if I don't have sufficient volunteers and then I have to seek compulsory redundancies, which isn't a place I want to be. But as I sign up volunteers, that's when we're risk assessing what that means, and then I can provide that more detail. I'm not really in a position to do it yet, as the expressions of interest are still coming in.
Thank you very much.
Lovely, thanks both. Do we have any more questions of Sheena, please? Councillor Sonia Reynolds, please.
I was just, building on what Sarah's just asked. I didn't hear that was a yes. We will see much more about the risk handling, because it's not just about the risks in the process. It's about the implication risks and how they'll be managed over all of this, as well as Sheena's team. The other thing I wanted to follow up with Sheena was robot in these sorts of services. Could you tell us a bit more, please? It's just intriguing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Sheena, would you like to elaborate a bit on the robot, please?
Yeah, so the robot has a name. It's Robot De Niro. And Robot De Niro started working in the HR team in, I think it was 2017 now. So we brought him in, if I'm going to assign him a gender, we brought him in originally to support the DBS, the Disclosure and Barring Service process, which is a very mundane, routine admin process. It's the one process that absolutely everybody hates doing. It's constant, and it is about moving things from A to B to C to D. It is an excellent process for robotics process automate. So the robot can pick things up. As long as you have a process where you can say, if it's A plus B, then you file it over here. If it's A plus C, actually you need to bring that to the attention of a human who will intervene. So sometimes, very rarely in the DBS process, so where there's a positive criminal record, for instance, you need to bring that to the attention of a human, but most of the time it's just about filing, it's about emailing, it's about putting it on the employee record. So that all happens electronically now. There's very little human intervention, there's very few mistakes, and it's much quicker. So one of the biggest complaints that we used to get as a team were delays in the criminal records coming through in the recruitment process. We can get them back in less than a week now. So it really valuable. It enabled us to take a post out of the admin team and move them into sickness absence support. So that's how we first introduced the robot. Since then, the robot has gone on to take on end of fixed term contract processes, and there's a number of other processes that we're looking to give him. So and it's a really, I can't emphasize how positive it's been, and from our customers' perspective as well. So they don't really see a change in the service other than it gets really quick and really accurate. So it's quite a winner if you can find a process that's suitable for it.
Many thanks, Sheena. I'd like to bring Noel in at this point as well, please.
Yeah, just wanted to answer the first part of your question, Councillor Reynolds, in terms of the impact. Clearly, when the proposal has been fully worked up, we know exactly which posts are coming out from which parts of the structure. We will be very articulate in the impact that is going to have on service provision from that area, and you will see a lot of detail around the impact, and it'll obviously be up to members to decide ultimately whether they believe that impact to be acceptable or not. Diolch.
Thank you, Noel. Councillor Reynolds, would you like to come back, or are you happy with the responses? Yeah. Thank you. Are there any more questions of... Oh, hang on, just looking up. I can see Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just on the trade union facilities budget, line K, you mentioned, Sheena, that it supports a secondment of staff with GMB and Unison. Can you just explain a little bit more about it? Because when I read it first, I was wondering if it was around, physical spaces, rooms and, that sort of thing. How expansive is that budget? Because I'm not really familiar with this area of the council, if I'm honest.
Thank you, Councillor Percy. Sheena, please.
Yeah, okay. So the budget is split into two across GMB and Unison, and it's just under 200k per annum. So it basically is funding trade union duty time. So as an employer, we have an obligation to enable trade union reps to undertake trade union duties. So not activities which are concerned with the business of the trade union. These are duties which is work in support of us as an employer. So, for example, supporting employees through grievance disciplinary processes, and really importantly for us, supporting management of change, which is pretty crucial at the moment, but also the collective bargaining machinery as well. So that's what that supports. We organise this in two ways across the council. So we have trade union reps within services who are given reasonable time off. That is supported by the services themselves. But some trade union duties are so onerous. So, for example, if we are in negotiations at the moment, we're drawing the trade unions into the redeployment action group that Noelwyn referred to, so supporting redeployment activity, job reductions, etc. So to ensure that the two biggest trade unions, Unison and GMB, has sufficient capacity for that, the council created a budget to support secondments. So that's where we second people nominated by the trade union branches. So they nominate the secondees. We check that it's within the budget for that year, and if we can support it through the budget, then we put in place a secondment agreement. So at the moment, we've got two employees seconded to the GMB, and we've got 2 employees seconded to Unison, and we also support a part-time administrator.
Lovely, thanks, Sheena. Is that okay? Yeah, Councillor Percy.
If I could just come back briefly, if that's okay, Chair.
No problem. Carry on.
No, thanks, Sheena. That is very helpful. It's could give me a much better overview. So this saving specifically is in relation to the secondment rather than any wider part of the budget. Is that what you're saying as well?
So we're proposing to reduce the budget that's allocated to supporting secondments. In terms of the current arrangements, it's not going to impact on current secondments. But of course, when you reduce a budget, you've reduced a budget. It's never going back upwards, is it? So I do need to consult with the regional trade unions in relation to that. So this is a proposal at this stage, and I obviously need to get feedback from the trade unions in relation to it.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Lovely, thank you, Sheena. Next up, we have Councillor Alan Llewellyn, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, for allowing me to come back in. And it's just a general comment, really, because all the questions are relevant. This is a very, very difficult discussion, and I think that you hear in the voice of a tremendously professional officer this afternoon what some of these implications are in terms of our workforce and those that in this context, are behind the scenes, but I think, an essential part of making sure that we deliver all our services. So it's relevant, obviously, to ask all the questions, but I think we can see that our room for manoeuvre is very, very limited. And something that's been set out by our chief executive is, as well as scrutinising the individual proposals in as much detail as is needed and as is helpful. Another part of what we have to do across the chamber is to make the case for public services. Welsh Government and UK Government will be making decisions over the next few months over the settlement that will come to us as local government. Our room for manoeuvre is very, very limited. We have to make the case, and that's all of us as members, whatever contacts, whatever connections we have at Welsh Government level, at UK Government level, government and backbenchers for that matter, that there has to be an investment in public services. Otherwise, all these and more cuts that we're looking at this afternoon will become a reality. And I don't think that's anything any of us want to see. So thanks for your indulgence on that, Chair.
Many thanks for your comment, Alan. Obviously great to be heard by everyone. Difficult times. Are there any other questions of Sheena at this point, please? I can't see anything. Oh, Councillor Percy. Thank you.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. There was another question I was pondering, and it's a wider question, but it's one that maybe it covers Sheena as HR, and this is just in terms of across the council. There's going to be service areas looking at voluntary redundancies, early retirement arrangements, etc. Obviously, there's still a degree of uncertainty around the budget, and best case scenario, national government budgets change or we find savings in another place, and some of these things may not need to happen. How does that work in terms of if we've had volunteers, for example, for voluntary redundancy? Because that seems to be something that is being looked at across the board, and I was trying to sort of work out the logic in my head of how that might pan out from a timeline point of view, and also just from an organisational structural point of view, where we may end up losing a member of staff, not needing to make the saving, and then what do we do? Do we refill the post, or do we do? I don't know. I'm just putting that out there because it feels like this isn't something we've done on a big scale for a little while. This feels quite different to me as a scrutinising a budget. This year, that there seems to be a lot more talk of staffing changes, and I'm just trying to understand how that's going to work.
Okay.
On a practical level. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Percy, thank you for that. Obviously, because this is a wider issue, I'm going to bring Hugh on this one, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I'll start, and perhaps Sheena may want to add something, but excuse me, the conversations that are going on at the moment are going on a sort of non-committal basis. So basically just sort of asking staff, would they be interested, but not actually saying, this is a given going forward. So until we know the settlement in December, obviously we'd be silly to sign people up on a VR scheme, lose posts that we don't have to, make savings that we don't have to. So we're just having sort of informal consultation with staff at the moment. Excuse me, sorry. And then if we do need to make VRs and people are willing to go, then the timescale around signing people up after Christmas would allow us to make the savings from just after the beginning of April. So if we were starting a compulsory redundancy process, there's a much longer lead-in time around that, and recognising that if that's where we do have to end up, we won't be able to make savings by the beginning of April. But as I say, at the moment, we're just having discussions on a non-committal basis just to see if there would be staff interested in going. But Sheena, I'm not sure if you want to add to that as well. Thank you.
I don't think I can add to that. Thank you, Hugh.
Lovely, thank you. Can I bring in Councillor Simon Noyle, please?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on one thing on what Councillor Sean Percy mentioned there about other options, other alternatives, additional items. To date, there have been none. But but clearly this is the time to come up with those. So if you do have any alternatives or other options for savings proposals or income generations, all members, please, you must come forward with them so that they can be investigated to see if they are going to be taken forward or not. This is the time to do that. We cannot wait until December, January, February, because it's going to be too late. Okay, so it's really important that if anybody comes up with anything that they think can be a savings proposal, they come up with it as soon as they can. Thank you, Sean, for reminding me about that.
Thank you, Councillor Noel. Is everything okay, Councillor Percy? Happy with that?
If I could just only briefly, no, that is very helpful sort of clarity. I think perhaps what I'm alluding to is maybe the impact of even discussing the potential of VR proposals with staff will potentially have an impact on how decisions staff might take. If they think the option might be there, they may consider another job or another opportunity or another change in their life. So I think that's just something for us to bear in mind, isn't it? Once we start having those conversations, however informal, there's going to be a potential impact, even if we, don't need to do those proposals down the line. I think that's perhaps some of the point I was making, but I appreciate the clarity on the timeline because I wasn't sure of the exact timescale. So that's very helpful. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Percy. Bring Hugh back in a sec.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Councillor Percy. And, there's an issue as well, despite how informal and non-committal we are being around raising expectations. But I think we thought collectively it was better to start having those discussions now as opposed to waiting until we've had the settlement, because then we'd be sort of just before Christmas talking about redundancies, which wouldn't be where we want to be. So 100%, yes, I absolutely take that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Next up, I have Councillor Sonia Reynolds, please.
I'm going to ask what may be a very stupid question, but I'm trying to make sense of it in my mind, so please bear with me. And I'm not an economist or anything like that. If we've got vacancy management this year, and we've got posts that are vacant, and we've already had said at one point today in the digital services, we've already realised 150k of those savings this year. How do we make additional savings next year by cutting those posts? So it's, if we've got vacancy management, we're making saving. If we just cut the vacant posts, how do we make a saving? Am I being...
Okay, bring Hugh in. Thank you.
No, that's a perfectly legitimate question. So within this year, taking Chris, for example, Chris would have a vacant post in his budget, but he'd actually have a budget for them. So this year he would be underspending on those posts in effect. He's got a budget for a person. There's nobody in post, so he's actually just underspending this year. What he's saying next year is he's actually going to take that budget away. So the budget won't be there anymore. So he's actually deleting the post, deleting the budget. So I hope that makes sense.
Councillor Reynolds?
We were counting vacancy management as savings. So that's where it gets complicated for me.
Yeah, but everybody's got a vacancy management target as well. So in addition to taking these vacant posts out, Chris will have a vacancy management target he has to achieve on top of these savings. So that's where it becomes difficult, is that we've already imposed a vacancy management target, and now we're asking people to make a further 5% savings. So in basically carrying more vacancies again and deleting them. So Chris, do you want to explain?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the savings that we've made in previous years for the vacancy targets are where we've held posts on the structure and they've been vacant, so they've just been frozen on the structure. But I've now got to realise this additional £290,000 savings. So we're into posts now that are occupied, because those are the vacant posts. There are no more vacant posts to consider to meet that additional saving that we require. Does that make sense?
I'll look forward to going through the numbers with you at a later date.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Next up, I have, please, Councillor Charlotte Goldsworthy, please.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. It's been interesting listening to all of this, and one of the things that strikes me is, like, if we're not replacing a post or things like that, we are one of the biggest employers in the area. Given obviously we've got the issues with the Tata Steel and everything else, what my concern about everything is going forward, where are the future jobs as well for obviously residents and that? Because it's always like over the years, the council, you know, we've had the apprentices, they work their way up, you know, someone has redundancy, then that job is basically filled then by usually the apprentice, you know, stepping up. And I think, you know, where's the point in the future where basically we haven't even got that? So as a local society, where are our future jobs not coming from as well? When we're actually looking at all these cuts and everything, we've got plenty of teams, we've got plenty of support services out there now, supporting unemployment, you know, businesses and things like that. But again, if the jobs themselves are going to, like, you know, robots and things like that, where are we going for the future of jobs for people? And, you know, it's generations to come. And I think, you know, when we look at this and it's about cuts, it's, you know, looking at next year's spend and the spends after. My concern is, where are our future jobs coming from? We can say about the free ports, you can say about, you know, everything is hypothetical, but it is really concerning for us. And I don't think sometimes the public actually appreciate that. So I don't know if, like, when we're actually putting it out to the public, maybe the ABC of explaining how all this happens and the pressures are given are actually translated to the public as well. Because sometimes, like Simon's just asked us now about, you know, more ideas and that, but sometimes we need to go to the public themselves to ask them to. So I know we do the public consultation on the budget and things like this, but maybe our, you know, going forward, there's a different approach as well. Because, like as Sonia said, she's not, you know, it's not her bag, an economist and that is definitely not my bag, you know. But so sometimes maybe our approach as a council, being a bit more innovative, is going out there and asking for some more ideas as well, because then maybe your public will have a better understanding of how the council operates as well, and the hard tasks. So when we're actually being abused about the council tax, you know, or parking charges going up and things like this, it'd be a bit more working with us than against us. You know, it's just one of those. It is, and I take my hat off to all of you, because you know, it is tough times, and we're going into tougher times. So, but in regards to just one thing that has come up as well is, like you mentioned, like the union and cutting the unions. I think, what is it, 12,000 or something like that? Has the union themselves been approached to basically maybe cover the, you know, them? Because some unions are, you know, quite cash rich, really. So have they been approached to maybe step in with that £12,000 to basically cover, you know, that sort of step? Or is it the fact that the council always takes on that it's the council and don't ask for things like that? I don't know, because I don't know how obviously it operates. So that's my input for today.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsworthy. If I just respond myself, really, as the chair of this committee, I think none of us will disagree with any of the points you're making about job vacancies, but unfortunately that's the situation we find ourselves in. I'm not going to apportion blame to anyone or any party or any government, but we find ourselves in a position where we've got to find these savings. And whilst we all would love to employ as many people as we could and get everyone into employment, sadly the state we find ourselves in doesn't allow us to be able to do that at this point. So it's really, as far as the consultation goes, I have been pushing and I can see a couple of people around the room nodding about when we are going out to public consultation, because I believe that is our job. We should be encouraging, as the councillors, we should be encouraging as many people in our area to respond to the consultation and encouraging them to come forward with ideas. And I think once we do go out for consultation, which I believe is early January, or December, sorry, correct me, and early January, I think it's incumbent upon ourselves that we've got to start pushing our people. You know, I get it all the time, people moaning about this service, moaning about that service, and then I say, well, come up with some ideas. This is what we got to cut. And I think that is our job then, to be able to do that. And I think, I'm sure when we go to consultation, we are starting to use the media a bit more recently. You know, Simon was on a call in the other day, and I thought he was excellent, because he represented a lot of councils, not just our own. We're all finding ourselves in the same position, aren't we? So, you know, part of that. I'll have to come back to Sheena about the trade union when I'm not, I couldn't answer that one myself, Sheena.
Thank you, and thanks, Councillor Goldsworthy. I love that suggestion. So Unison already part fund the admin post that we part fund as well. So I think you make a great point, and I will be raising that with the regional officers. So thank you.
Another good suggestion, as we say, and a good idea coming in. Would you like to come back in, Councillor Goldsworthy?
No, thanks. I've had a little contribution now, haven't I?
Lovely. Thank you,
Never know,
Charlotte.
mind I may be come back
Yeah.
later.
Hey, lovely. Thank you, Charlotte. Next on then is Councillor Alan Llewellyn, please.
Yeah, diolch yn fawr. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to come back in again in a scooter meeting. But obviously, as cabinet members are present, we're listening to everything that people are saying. Just some observations on the questions and comments made by Sean and Sonia a bit earlier. I'm not quite sure in Sean's point if he was suggesting that we shouldn't be having these discussions now with our staff members because we haven't got the complete picture. But I think that the reality, this is the reality of the situation we're facing. And I think that if we leave the discussions, or if staff members are not aware, it's going to make things that much more difficult if we have to actually implement these decisions when we know what the local government settlement actually is. And I think one important point is that our staff, our heads of services, our accountable managers have already been part all along the way about what we're looking at today in scrutiny. I'll be looking at in all the other scrutiny meetings. They realise the gravity of the situation, and this is where I guess push comes to shove, isn't it? People realise the gravity of the situation, and I think that they deserve to have an honest conversation at the earliest possible opportunity about what the decisions that we'll all have to face. So I don't think we should delay having those discussions. Obviously, we'll have to formalise them as and when we know what the actual settlement is. And then I'd like to thank Charlotte for her contribution referring to Tata. Yes, I mean, we've obviously made the commitment that we would try to help the Tata workforce in terms of any opportunities that are available in the council. But obviously, some of those opportunities are going to be more limited if we have to implement the cuts that are before us in scrutiny at the moment. And I think that's another part of what we have to take to government at UK and Welsh government level, is the fact that apart from anything that we are facing as a council and our residents are facing in terms of our services, it's against and within the context of what's happening in Tata, and everything we have to do to try and support that workforce, but also the future economy of the area. So it's another reason why we have to advocate on behalf of public services in Neath, Talbot and Wales as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Councillor Percy, please.
Thank you. No, just to clarify, perhaps to Alan, I wasn't advocating any particular decision on when to speak to staff. I was trying to get some clarity on the timescales and the process, really just to understand that a bit more. So that just to be clear, I wasn't advocating that we delay telling staff. I was just trying to understand what the timeline looks like, and actually if we did need to withdraw an offer, what the impact of that might be. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Percy. Yeah, that's what I thought as well. And actually, I was glad you asked that question, because it showed what compulsory redundancy would take longer. And anyway, so you had a good response from you on that one. That was really, really good. Are there any more questions, please, for Sheena, before we can let her escape after her 8 points? Sheena, thank you very much for all your responses this afternoon. Obviously, it's a very, very tough time and unenviable position to be in with as far as staff is concerned. Can I just ask you to give my best to Robert De Niro when you get back to the office, please? Okay, thank you very much. Which now brings us along to Craig. Craig, you are next up, please, for points L to Q, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just by way of an introduction for the staff members, Legal and Democratic Services is not just your traditional solicitors or those sort of officers ultimately involved. It actually encapsulates a wide variety of both frontline services and corporate support as well. So as well as the legal officers, we also include our Democratic Services team, the scrutiny officers, and the people who support members in that respect. Our legal regulatory team, which includes our licensing, commons and rights of way work. Our corporate procurement team, so obviously those in charge then of supporting sections in respect of all of their procurement activities and their commissioning processes they embark on. Our registrar service based in Neath, so our births, marriages and death service, and also as well our business support team at the same time. And not to mention, of course, elections, who obviously become very apparent at certain times during the calendar. Overall, we are roughly 90 members of staff, but as you can see, with 10 teams ultimately within Legal and Democratic Services, the number of staff in each of those teams is comparatively small, ranging from 4 in some cases up to about 14 or 15 in others. So a wide variety of services which are encapsulated within the service area. So just to give that a little bit of clarity there. Over the last couple of years, we've been very much focused on income generation opportunities. So we've looked at new proposals of work in our registrars, different types of services we've been able to offer in the licensing area as well. We have probably reached the capacity of what we can ultimately do there, because obviously there can only be so much demand for some of these services. So it's fruitless us trying to put income targets on matters which we know we would never ultimately be able to meet. So you will notice this year that income generation opportunities are slightly different compared to what we've had previously, and I'll explain more in detail now. We've also seen obviously a significant reduction in the number of staff over the years in legal services. When I first started here in 2008, there were much more than what we operate under now, and you can argue that we are seeing much more complex programs of work ultimately coming through at this stage, with elements like the Freeport, some of the Tata work, our regeneration matters. And so we do operate now in a much more complex environment, which does require a lot more legal support to various different sections. So whilst we are probably the backroom elements, I'd like to think of ourselves as the enablers, which enable lots of sections ultimately to go out and do the work that they need to do as part of the overarching proposal. So just to give you a little bit of context there. So if I start with L, which is service remodeling legal services, what that effectively means for us is that we have a post which will be vacant in that sense, and we will be deleting those posts from the structure. And what that effectively means across the board then is I have to redistribute the work that that one officer would ultimately be undertaking to other members of the team. And whilst we can do it in a measured way, so no one person ultimately picks up all the different elements, what it does mean is that the workload pressures and workload levels on other officers will increase naturally as a result of it. There'll be no ultimately getting around that. The measure that we've got to take into account is the lawyers that we employ are specialists in their areas. You don't often see very much generic lawyers in local government. We have litigation lawyers, we have property lawyers, planning lawyers. Each of them have different skill strengths and different knowledge and abilities which they bring to the overarching service of the council. So when we do look at deleting posts, we are deleting that specialism that those officers have ultimately generated. And whilst officers are more than competent at being able to pick up other matters and give that advice, it will take them longer because they're going to have to get to grips with various matters, and they're going to have to advise in areas which are not necessarily the main area which they're ultimately au fait with. So there's always going to be a corresponding impact when you take a specialist post out of the structure. We will continue to try and do that work, but it will be done in a very different way, is the way I probably would try and answer it there. Our next one, M, business administration. So our business administration team has a wide variety of functions, as well as supporting the legal officers in the preparation of court documents, court bundles, and the general administrative tasks that ultimately the lawyers have to go through. They are responsible for coordinating our FOI and data protection responses and questions as and when they come in. They oversee the running of our mail room. They do a lot of the finance and the arrangements for payments within the legal democratic services. They also provide additional support then to the Finance Directorate and what was the Chief Executive's Directorate previously, and the various work there. They also as well undertake our complaints processes for strategy and corporate services. An officer has indicated to me that they will be retiring at the end of this financial year. So again, that post would be deleted from the structure, and the workload levels will be aligned effectively within that team to be able to ensure that there's no drop in continuity and we can provide those services. But again, what this does mean, it's corresponding impacts on other members of staff because they're all picking up little bits of extra work when they've already got a very busy day-to-day workload in what they do. And it also links into when I'll talk to you about mailroom services now shortly, because the linkage tends to sit around there. I refer to income generation charges to specific projects. So members will have taken decisions previously which have agreed that Neath Talbot will be the accountable body for the Celtic Freeport. There is a significant volume of work that ultimately comes from an officer perspective there, and a lot of support that I'll be providing to the various different decision-making processes. Fortunately, we are in a position where we can charge some of that work back as part of the income that will be generated there. So the reference to 21,000 is the external work I do for other organisations and being able to recharge that. Now, it would have been the case historically that where you are charging for those services, you can use it to try and backfill your own availability in some way. So whilst you would be undertaking work for those bodies, something else may have to fall by the wayside. So you would recruit somebody in to make sure that's running. We're not in the position ultimately where we can do that anymore. So it just means the additional work pressures come in and we'll meet that and absorb it under the current structure that we have. Corporate Joint Committee. So again, another role I fulfil is I am the monitoring officer for the South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee, and we also provide the democratic services support to that committee, and we do recharge for our time ultimately as part of that process. In the past, rather than go out to try and recruit additional officers, we've used the small sum of money that we've been able to get for that to look at our succession planning. We've been able to recruit a trainee solicitor who has now qualified and started work with us in a substantive post. And so we've used it as the opportunity to help develop the legal and democratic services team through training, learning opportunities, qualifications. So not only helping retention in the different ways that we do it, it's also building our team ultimately for the future to meet the various demands coming forward. In essence, now what we will be doing is stopping that level of work, and we will be underpinning some of our core costs ultimately by that additional sum of money that will come through to us. So obviously not an immediate impact on the ground, but what it will do, it will mean it will reduce the opportunities we have for that development. And as you imagine, the law is ever changing. There's different obligations coming forward. We'll have to try and find ways to sort of develop the service and to realign in different ways then from there. Mailroom is something that I've been looking at for a while now, and I'm proposing that we take some sum of money out of that service. So as you will appreciate, mail has changed in the nature of the way that the service operates. Most things now are via emails. We've also got some external arrangements in place there. And so whilst we see peaks and troughs ultimately in the mailroom service, so for example, election time, there's a lot of correspondence that ultimately comes out, and when there are different processes that need to be embarked on and different sort of consultations, etc., the cost of the mailroom has been a little bit higher than what we would anticipate. So the reality of that comes down to that we have to have certain software, we have to have certain equipment, certain machinery to process the mail. And it doesn't matter whether you have 100 letters or 100,000 letters, you've still got to have that level of equipment. So what we're trying to do is realign the service to be able to cope for the existing reduction of mail now that we're seeing, also to adapt the service going forward. So when mail comes in, rather than us couriering it around various buildings where we need pool cars and different elements, what we will be doing is scanning it on to various different buildings. So just try and modernize the service to cope with new ways of working, and at the same time then try and reduce some of those costs ultimately that we're incurring, and some of the subscriptions that we're paying for then will change as a result of it. So a modest target there ultimately, and we're hoping we can build on that as time goes on, but I think a realistic estimation of what we think we can take out of the system at the moment. There is no denying it will have an impact ultimately on service areas within the council. So whereas now we've been able to pick up mail, for example, from Neath that needs to be issued, and then we've been able to facilitate the handling of it, but onwards that will have to stop. So there could be a delay in some correspondence ultimately being issued, and we'll have to work with teams to be able to prioritise and meet their demands. It wouldn't be the all-encompassing and the all-supportive service that we've had previously. We will be scaling it back in different ways. And then finally, the element for me is reduction in legal services online resources. So as you speak to any lawyers, they would tell you we're only as good as the information that we can get from the law and the various different subscriptions that we provide. And what that information does, it gives us access to up-to-date cases, up-to-date laws, various different precedents, models in that sense. And it's obviously a very important tool ultimately to lawyers, and they are very much heavily dependent on it when we need to check various information and to make sure we are providing the best advice, and it's up-to-date advice because, as I mentioned, the law changes on a regular basis. So what we will be looking to do is scale back our legal resources. So the impact that predominantly is going to have is we won't have information with ease of access. It's going to take us longer ultimately to make sure that we are checking the information. We'll have to do a lot more cross-referencing. We'll have to do a lot more work in that regard to make sure that we're constantly staying up to date with the latest developments. We will be removing access to some very useful precedents and various different documents when we need to create bespoke arrangements. So again, there's going to be more time having to be spent on various different matters. And then when we're already at busy workloads, when we're at capacity in different ways, it just adds an additional pressure ultimately on as part of those processes. So whilst the proposals itself there are probably very different to what you've heard from HR and digital services, because there doesn't seem to be many sort of compulsory redundancies or anything like that which are being impacted, what the collective element of those is the nature of the service is going to be changing, and we will have to absorb much more work with much less scope ultimately to try and absorb it all. So that's really a general overview, Chair, of the proposals on the table.
Many thanks, Craig, from your Super Six, as I call it, right? You've got 6 points. We'll now move to members' questions. Would anybody like to ask any questions of Craig, please? Councillor Sonia Reynolds.
Hi. I wanted to know what the overall budget is for the legal resources that you're cutting 10 grand from or proposing to. Obviously, it is and if it's going to increase time, does the risk impact say that it's actually a worthwhile thing to cut? It's a juggling act. So yeah.
It's roughly about 15 to 20% of our resource budget at this stage, I would suggest, looking at what we actually subscribe to. And it covers off predominantly 3 resources that I'm looking at that we will be effectively losing one of those 3 as part of the process. What it effectively will mean for us is that we lose that ease of access to various bits of information. And I'm working now with my managers to go through, well, what are we using to a fullest extent? What are we using more limited in that sense? And we are doing a little bit of an exercise. So I'm involving all of the legal services team so we can design and we access the resources which they think ultimately they need to do their job. So rather than me just top slicing and saying I'm stopping that service, we're doing more of a collective viewpoint to work out, well, what do we use regularly? What do we use sparingly? What can we afford to, because we can find it in a very different way ultimately. So there is still a little bit of work ongoing as to work out what that reduction is actually going to be and which one we're going to take away. But there is some scope for us to do it, hopefully with a limited impact, but there will be an impact in some way because you are losing a valid resource as and when you need it. And sometimes we don't know what's coming through the door. So we don't know what type of resources we need, what type of documents we need to create. You lose that flexibility that we get with different resources.
Many thanks, Craig. Councillor Reynolds.
Are we already sharing those resources across other authorities rather than just paying for the total ourselves? Are we already spreading out the costs?
We used to. But what we found previously is there's very different provisions ultimately in different authorities. And ironically, we managed to negotiate some cheaper deals by coming in ourselves as opposed to doing it on that regional level. So we take a pragmatic approach. If we think there is a saving that can be realised by looking at this on a regional level, we take advantage of that. And we've got close relationships between the other heads of legal and myself. And we look to try and find those when we meet on a regular basis. But ironically, we have found by entering into our own contracts and making them bespoke ultimately to MPT, we have been able to find some savings in recent times. Ironically, it's what it is, but it does seem to work in this legal resource world for some strange reason.
Great, thanks, Craig. Are you happy with that, Councillor?
I've got another question.
Okay,
Phil,
yep.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask about the project funding aspect and the charging into, which is, fine. But presumably we already charge for internal projects. So if legal has to take a role in SPF, for example, or something of that nature, we already charge into those funds. And we're not in this talking about any cross-departmental charging for services, I hope.
No, we're not talking about cross-departmental charges at all. What you find, ironically, in the legal world is there will be some projects where we can recharge our time to. So something like SPF, we have been noting what our times would be. In grants, for example, we can't actually secure our own internal legal resources for it. So you'd find that if we went external for legal support, sometimes those fees would ultimately be met, but we can't actually recover them if we do that work ultimately in-house. So it's one of the misnomers of the grant scheme. But nevertheless, where we can, we do try and recharge for it. And within our budget, we've got some income generation targets in any event, and that's what those income generation targets would be, to make sure that we're recovering from some of those grants as we go forward.
Good. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Councillor. Next up, I have Councillor Sarah Thomas, please.
Sorry about that. I thought Sean was in front of me. Okay, so really it's same sort of topic. So on S and CSQ, reduction in legal services online resources. I was a little worried by that, because online resources sounds like something that people can go and look at, and it doesn't take up officer time. So reducing that might result in an increase in workload. Could we have a bit of clarity on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two ways I can give you some examples of here, which when you lose certain levels of resources, the impact ultimately it could have. So if I was asked to create a new agreement for a particular matter that's come forward, a set of terms of reference or a set of a new contract, property deal, whatever the case may be, and it's not something ultimately that we've done before, we can look to see what sort of precedent models are out there, and we have access to a wide bank of arrangements and agreements where we can draw down sort of templates, which we can then make bespoke ultimately to NPT and the type of arrangement ultimately that we're going to be looking at. And that's predominantly how one of the legal services worlds operates. You look to see what somebody else has done and try and adapt it almost in some format. But what happening here is, without access to that sort of resource bank, we would be starting from scratch, effectively, to try and create something which the lawyers are more than capable of ultimately doing, and the competency is there without a shadow of a doubt. It'll just take longer ultimately to pull that together. And another example ultimately could be I need to check, for example, whether a current law is ultimately still in force or whether it's been amended or whatever the case may be. By getting access ultimately to online resources, that work is done for you in advance, so you can then just drag that information down, something is valid, and then you move on. Effectively, by taking away some of those resources, I'll be doing a lot of cross-referencing, where I'll find one bit of legislation that tells me it will have been amended by something else, so I need to go back to look at that to make sure it all tallies through. It'll just add a little bit more time into the process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Just check with Councillor Percy. I did have you written down, and then when I looked up, your name had disappeared. Have you had your answer answered already? Your question answered, sorry, already?
Yeah, I've had my question answered, Diolch.
Lovely, thanks, Sean. Next up then is Councillor Charles Goldsworthy, please.
Sorry about this, but it might the question might go to across not just Craig, but obviously others as well. It's just something came to me when Sonia mentioned about other councils and partnership working, etc. So I've got a few concerns at the moment, which is obviously in my own sort of committee that I've raised, and it's basically where a substantial amount of money goes to bodies now that have obviously come up over previous years, like the Regional Partnership Board and things like that. And so rather than the money coming directly now to councils, they go into like regional partnerships or other organisations outside of councils to run services and projects, etc. Has there been any work over the past years to see if how we have been affected as a council by obviously this type of model of partnership, working with the councils as well? Because obviously we've taken money which I would have assumed would come like directly to our services, maybe, because it's still us more or less like being part of it or being on the chairs of these boards. So it's given extra tiers and extra meetings of our staff. So what has been the impact on councils, if anyone can answer, maybe they can't, of these the new methods of working in partnership? Has there been sort of evaluations of people analysing the good and the bad? Because what I found over the years is we can implement certain things, but even if they're not working, we don't do anything about it. It's as if we stuck with it. So can anyone answer that type of question, please?
Thank you, Councillor Goldsworthy. We bring Hugh in on that one, please.
Yeah, I suppose I can't answer specifically, but I can give you some context around the fact that obviously these regional working arrangements are pushed obviously by the Welsh Government. They're not something that we as a council particularly decide we want to enter into. But like you say, with the Regional Partnership Board, if we don't play part of the game, you don't get any money at all out of it. So clearly we do need to participate where the Welsh Government put these arrangements in place. Just to give you an example, I suppose, of evaluation, you will remember, I suppose, we used to be part of what was ERU, the Regional Working Consortium for Education. We decided as a council that we weren't getting value for money or decent enough service.
I've lost sound, I have.
Yeah, me.
The last bit you said is about obviously.
Yeah, we
the
just checking,
survey.
Charlotte. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, Hugh would just slipped out again. He'd go again now. Hold on.
Okay.
Well, my light is on. Can you hear me now? Or?
Yeah, now I can.
Right. Did you hear me talk about the fact that obviously these regional arrangements are put in place by Welsh Government because they perceive them to be more efficient?
Yeah,
even though
you were
we
just
don't.
on the bit about ERU and then it
Yeah,
went off.
I was just reminding members, really, some who may not remember, that we were part of the Regional Education Consortium, but we actually pulled out of that because it wasn't providing us with value for money or quality service. So where we don't think we're getting value for money and we can withdraw, we do so. But in terms of just a general evaluation, no, I don't think we've done anything specifically around that. Thank you.
Chair, if I can just come
If we
back.
bring, hang on a sec, Councillor Goldsworthy, bring Craig in as well, please. Thank you, Hugh.
And just to give you a sort of specific example, Councillor Goldsworthy, if you look at the Corporate Joint Committee, every year the Corporate Joint Committee has to set what they call its levy, how much it's going to be recharging back to the individual authorities. And as part of that consideration, there is always ongoing dialogue. How can we mitigate the costs ultimately back on substantive authorities to make sure that nobody is ultimately paying any more that they need to? And particularly as times are difficult in that sense, and when we look at the financial pressures of under, there is always that sort of route to try and find a way to reduce the minimum sum, ultimately the maximum sum that we are claiming back, and whilst we still then meet all of those statutory obligations, because as Hugh said, all of these different joint committees and all of the different elements that come out of it, it's always legislated in some way that we need to create them, like corporate joint committees, like area planning boards and all of those different arrangements. So we are compelled ultimately to be part of them, and the Welsh Government, UK Government, make the determination that's ultimately sometimes where the money goes, not necessarily to individual authorities.
Thank you, Craig. Councillor Goldsworthy?
So again, just like on something like that, and I know I'm going off a bit, but it's obviously it's an impact to us as an authority. That's what I'm looking at, and I'd like to see, because it is as Hugh said, it's like, well, if you don't play the game, you don't get anything out of it, I suppose. So is there any way, because do we challenge then, obviously, from a political as well as obviously officers, the Welsh Government, when it's not working in our favour? So we're under the pressures now, but again, are we going back and basically saying, rather than money go into a regional partnership, can we have it direct, please?
Lovely, thanks, Councillor Goldsworthy. I'll bring the leader in on this one, please.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. I don't know if you're aware, Craig might remember the name. There was a Valleys Regional Partnership that we paid into, and there was very little, if not anything, coming out, and we withdrew from that as well, saving this authority £30,000. So the points you were making, Craig has explained where we do need to be in partnership, which is very important, of course, as you would recognise. But where there is no benefit to this authority, those conversations are had with officers, chief executives, and legal representation, as Craig in this instance, to see You know, when tough decisions have to be made that we're going to be going through now, then you have to, the old saying, watch the penny, what's the saying? Pounds and the pennies look after themselves, isn't it?
Go on, Steve.
Whichever way round, Charlotte, you know what I'm saying. But that's the point now. We are down to that level. All low-hanging fruit has gone, I think, 2 years ago. So any savings that this authority can make for the right reasons should be made. So you are spot on where we look at where we benefit. We're not going to pull out of something that benefits us either, are we? So thank you.
Thank you, Leader. And over to Craig as well, please.
Yeah, just to add as well, it's important to remember that in individual scrutiny committees, you've got the opportunity to be able to look at specific arrangements to see what the corresponding impact is ultimately back to Neath Talbot Council. So if you looked at something like you just mentioned, Councillor Gauzy, with the area planning boards and the different elements there, by all means invite them to attend one of your scrutiny committees and ask for a presentation about the impact of what they bring to the people of Neath Talbot as part of that service, and look at that particular type of arrangement. And you know, we do encourage scrutiny committees to start looking at some of those regional partnerships, because you can get a lot of benefit and see the positives and the negatives that they bring to the Neath Talbot residents.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Councillor Goldsworthy. Good points. Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Yeah, David, thanks. Just briefly on this topic, as one of the members who sits on the CJC Scrutiny Committee, I mean, we've discussed the merits or otherwise of different forms of regional working in that forum numerous times, and it's something that seems to be, you know, at the forefront of people's minds, you know, in councils across Wales, and certainly in that regional arrangement. But it's always worth remembering as well, and I've discussed this particular issue with Craig. You know, where there is a reluctance to fully engage in some of these regional working arrangements, you can sometimes end up with all the costs and none of the benefits. But actually, sometimes you can, if you engage and get the most out of it, you can realise those benefits. So you often get out what you put in, not just in cost, but in the manner in which you engage as well. And I just thought I'd make that point, just as a general point. I'm sure it doesn't apply to all of the regional arrangements, but it's something I've noted, particularly in the CJC, is sometimes there's a reluctance to engage in it at all because of an opposition to the structure, and then actually you end up with the fixed costs of it anyway, and you don't really get much out of it. So I'll just throw that in as an observation and a thought. But yeah, okay.
I have no sound. Sound's gone.
I think the chamber might have frozen.
Yeah, it's frozen, I think.
Oh, you're back now.
Oh.
Now you're on mute now, the chamber, sorry. But we've got your video back. The chamber is muted on Teams. I can see the mic is on, but there we are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Just making sure we got everyone back in. Bear with us a minute. We've had a little bit of a spike, I think.
Those of us online didn't seem to leave the meeting. I think we just lost you.
Oh, from the size of me, Sean, how could you lose me? All happy? Where were we? I think, Sean, I think you were in the middle of saying a very good point, actually.
There wasn't particularly a question in there, so it's not critical. I repeat it, Chair.
It was valid points, mind you made, in fairness.
No, that's fair. No, I think that's a good point. You know, we got to. I think that some of it we got to follow because of legislation, and then others we got to make an honest opinion on whether it's worthwhile or not, isn't it? And perhaps we should get involved as much as we can to get as much benefit as we can. So thank you for that, Sean. Yeah. Are there any more questions of Craig, please? I can't see any. Thank you, Craig, for your Super 6. And we move along to Nolwenn for his Super 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think every time we discuss any cuts to digital services, the technology reminds us how important digital services are and dips us out of the meeting. Things happened before, if I remember rightly. Yeah, so in terms of the last proposal, you reviewed the narrative already this afternoon around service remodelling, and reviewed the conversations with Sheena and Chris around the work that's being taken place to understand the staff within our structure who are potentially looking at voluntary redundancy or early retirement, flexible retirement, etc. So those conversations, as I said, are ongoing. What I will be looking at is whether we've got economies of scale across the directorate to see whether we can deliver some of our functions slightly differently. That'll become clearer as the next few weeks pass by. And like I said, the detail will come forward in the proposals further on in the budget process, Chair. Diolch.
Thank you, Nolwenn. Any questions from members of Nolwenn's one, which is R on the list? Service remodelling across directorate through voluntary redundancy. I think we've hit on most of this, to be honest. I think you've covered it all earlier on, Nolwenn, to be fair. I can't see any indications, which moves on to our last area, which is finance. Hugh with his twin two. Let's get in there. A and B of finance.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So just in terms of the finance division, to give you an overview, my budget amounts to just under £4.8 million, employ around 160 members of staff, provide a number of services from what you'd expect in terms of accountancy services, supporting all frontline directors and things like that. Provide an internal audit service that gives us an assurance around our internal control arrangements. Members may not know we provide what's called a court deputy service, which provides looks after people's finances who can't look after them themselves for about 340 clients. Provide a payroll service to make sure on the 28th of the month something drops into your bank account. Also, then we've got Anne Hinder's team over in Neath who collect obviously a council tax, highest performing in Wales for the last 4 years. We've also got Stuart Mason's team who administer housing benefits and financial assessments. And also within my £4.8 million budget sits the third sector grant scheme as well of £570,000. So that's an overview in terms of the finance division budget. In terms of the two savings proposals I've got, the first one is fairly straightforward. As you'd expect, the council has a wide number of insurance arrangements in place. Those contracts are retendered on a 5-year basis. The last round delivered a saving of £158,000 as a result of our claims history. So that's a simple just taking the budget out because we're not paying that amount for premiums anymore. The second one, as you've heard from colleagues, is around remodelling. So again, looking for members of staff who would prepare to go on VR. We've had one person who has left already this year and not replaced the post, so that will help contribute towards that saving. And again, exactly the same process around identifying probably one other person going forward. So those are my two, Chair. Diolch. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Before we move to members' questions, Nolwenn, you wanted to come back in or no? After Hugh, okay. Well, after Hugh, right at the end then. Okay, any questions from Hugh's area, please? Very good. I cannot see anyone. So, Nolwenn, it is you. Back in. Thank you, Hugh.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. I just wanted to kind of wrap up in a few short words. First of all, by once again thanking Chris, Sheena, and Craig for the work they and their teams have done in terms of bringing these forward, these proposals. I think you'll appreciate having gone through them line by line. None of these decisions are easy for us to put forward as officers. We appreciate also your understanding as elected members of the importance of the services that our directorate delivers, its importance in underpinning and enabling the rest of the directorates to deliver the services that they do to the residents of Neath Talbot Council. We will, over the coming weeks and months, work diligently to come up with the detail that will be put forward in future meetings for these proposals. But let's not take anything away from the commitment and effort that every single member of staff within the directorate puts in on a daily basis to deliver quality services. What we have to do is, as I mentioned at the very start, moving forward, there is no doubt our organisations across the whole of the country are going to reduce in capacity. What we've got to ensure is that we are exploiting all the very latest technologies that exist out there so that the services our residents receive are still of a very high quality. and first rate, which is what I'm sure all elected members would want. So it's a difficult period. It's a difficult balancing act in terms of delivering these cuts. But we, as a director, will do everything we can to ensure that there are no compulsory redundancies at the end of the day. And we'll come forward, like I said, with more detail and more articulate detail on the impact that these proposals will have in due course. Diolch. Diolch, Cadeirydd.
Many thanks, Neumann. I think as we come to the end now, there are no more questions on this particular agenda item. I think we've got to be very clear that obviously all of us are not in a very pleasant position at the moment regarding the funding for local governments. Yeah, and I think we've got to bear in mind that we are going to have to make decisions which are going to be very difficult to take for all our communities. We've got to find £21 million so we end up living within the means that we've been provided, and that I think we cannot go on providing the same level of service that people have been used to with far greatly reduced resources. And so when we do look at these, I think we've got to look at it with an open mind. We've got to be honest with our residents about where we're at. And I can't stress enough, because the leader keeps going on about it, Simon keeps going on about it. Please, can we put pressure on our AMs, our MPs and the financial leaders within both governments? Because at the moment, they're just not providing enough money. It only leaves me now, before we move on, to thank all the members of our teams, because it's not very pleasant when you work with people and you've got to start making decisions about their livelihood. So very, very, personally, I'm very appreciative of all the efforts everybody's making. Okay. Now we've scrutinised that so far until we have the next one come along. We note that the report and the suggestions and views that have been put forward by the committee. Thank you. But Simon, if you'd like to come in, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come in at the end as well, because it falls within part of my directorate, my portfolio as well, to thank all of the heads of service for what they've done. I think today's meeting has been quite useful. Interesting as well, obviously. Lots of busy people texting and writing things down at the beginning of the meeting because of the way it went. But I think it's a really important process that we need to go through with these 91, 92 line items in terms of getting to a position with the budget. We've started early to be able to understand the position so that we know when we get the UK budget on the 30th of October, and then the draft settlement from Welsh Government on the 10th of December. We'll know a little bit more detail then about how we go forward from there. I think it'll be important to understand and get our recommendations right in terms of the next round of these scrutiny committees. But in terms of scrutiny committees, for those who are online, education is Thursday, the 24th of October. Social services, housing and community safety, Thursday, the 7th of November. And then one to pitch a tent to bring a picnic for. Environment, regen and street scene is Friday, the 8th of November. They'll be really important meetings, as this one has been, to go through the items that are contained.
Sorry, just to clarify, there's a special environment scrutiny being arranged for the 4th of November due to the size of the agenda. So one on the 4th and one on the 8th.
Sorry, I missed that one.
Sorry,
one of the 4th.
Budget will be the 4th.
We'll have two picnics.
Yes, the budget will be the 4th.
Yeah, but it's important that all members attend those meetings and have the same level of scrutiny as we have had today, and then we go forward at the end of November and December with more with the recommendations of how we go forward. Thank you very much, Chair, for your time.
Thank you, Simon. We'll move to part two. Oh, sorry, Councillor Reynolds, please.
I just wanted to say this committee has been asking as well that we have sufficient time moving forward on the 28th to consider the budget proposals before they go out in more detail. It is vital, and I take on board what Phil said, and I've taken on board what Simon says. It is absolutely vital, however, that we understand the full impact of this and that the decisions are made with clear understanding of how there could be adverse impacts and how doing it slightly differently may enable that to happen. For example, I'm not sure in my own mind that the legal resource cutting is going to be a useful way forward, given the amount it saves and the amount of time it may cost. So, there are things that we need to look at the clear implications and the impact of these so that we can make a clear decision before this goes out to consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. I bring Hugh in now, please.
No, just to clarify that the next time that this scrutiny committee will see budget proposals will be part of the formal budget consultation process. So this is now a discussion early engagement for these 4 meetings. Members and officers will take views on board, and then we will come back to Cabinet in December with a set of formal proposals, which the Cabinet will decide whether to go to consult on. And then back in January, this committee will receive the proposals relevant to it. So there's not another opportunity to discuss this. This is today's discussion, and then it'll be the formal process, just to confirm.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Chair, can I just clarify what I said earlier to Charlotte? It was the Western Gateway was the committee that we withdrew from, just so it's in the meeting papers for clarity. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I just come back, Steve, you were absolutely spot on with very little impact happened on the Valley's money either.
Okay, Louise, thank you.
There. So that's
right.
A couple of them, look.
Let me hear. Okay, thank you very much, all. Moving on to agenda item 4, to consider items from the Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme. You'll be delighted to hear we have no Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme items to be considered. Part 3, agenda item 5, performance management. There are no performance management monitoring items to be considered at this meeting. Part 4, agenda item 6, selection of items for future scrutiny, pages 155 to 174. Alison, if you'd like to come in and give an update on this, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So members have been provided with both a copy of the Cabinet Forward Work Programme and also the Committee Forward Work Programme for this committee. Members have given an indication that they wish to pull the third sector grants and commissioning arrangements for scrutiny, which is going to Cabinet on the 4th of December, and that will be for pre-decision scrutiny, so it will be coming as planned at the moment for the 28th of November. And it's also already been alluded to, the members have asked for the 28th of November meeting to be split into 2 because the agenda is looking quite heavy. So we will be working with the chair and members and officers to ensure that we have 2 suitable dates arranged for that. And also, as Hugh has already mentioned, to confirm the budget scrutiny session will be on the 13th of January, and members should have received their invitations for that, and that will be added to the forward work programme for the next meeting as well. But that's it, Chair.
Thank you, Alison. Agenda item 7, any urgent items? You'll be delighted to hear that there are no urgent items this afternoon. And that concludes today's meeting. Thank you all for your contributions. Many thanks to all the officers who've given fantastic responses today. Thank you all.
Thanks all. Bye.